Hello, everyone. Hello to the people who have been waiting in the waiting room, the real fans, the OGs. How is it going? Cobra Commander, the channel historically did a good stream on this, really tore Chank and the young Turkish extremists apart. Yes, Esha is great. Esha, who's got historically, she used to do Late Nights with Lennon. That was another good show she did. I don't know if she still does that or not. Escher writes for the Grayzone. She took TYT comments as an attack towards her. Yeah, she should. I mean, really, anybody on the left should, right? Like, if they can. What they do in a lot of cases is they use the Grayzone and they use Jimmy Dore. And, this is the interview that TYT did with Briana Joy Gray is a perfect example of how these MSNBC liberal leftists will use Jimmy Dore in a gray zone or in the gray zone, just like invoke their names and assume everybody knows what that means. And that means you're right wing. If you're associated with the gray zone, you're a conspiracy theorist. If you're associated with Jimmy Dore, that means you're right wing. When TYT, they weren't for force the vote. They weren't for forcing the politicians to do Medicare for all. They called it sexist, and all these darn men just want to force these heroic female politicians like AOC to do something, instead of framing it as all these regular people who need healthcare want these wealthy politicians with healthcare to do something to help increase access. And even though, the Young Turks have been against unions, busting up unions at their own organization. So whenever it comes to the property question, whenever it comes to anything material, whenever it comes to land, whenever it comes to actually fighting for something that I would call socialism or socialistic, the Young Turks are against it, right? But then when it comes to COVID and identity politics and everything else, if you say anything out of line, if you use wrong speak, then you're on the right. You're a right winger. When the Young Turks, economic policies are all right. They use social policies to call other people right wingers, and the way they do it is say, you're with the gray zone, you're with Jimmy Dore, to the point where they're talking to Briana Joy Gray, one of the few Bernie staffers who didn't become a shit lib after the campaign. Her and me, I guess. Even though she was in a much more, higher up position than me within the campaign. Even though that's someone who's obviously not on the right, what TYT does is say, oh, you're Jimmy Dore person. Oh, you're a Gray Zone person. You're on the right. When Jimmy Dore and the Gray Zone are both left wing when it comes to imperialism and when it comes to economics, the two places where TYT always sides with the State Department. So what is TYT then? They're just liberals. They're just the YouTube version of MSNBC. So we'll watch some of that. We'll watch some of that later. Where Pilgrim? Hey, everybody. What's up, Where Pilgrim? Big moves. Definitely. The stream is growing. The squad that we have here is growing. Slowly but surely. Actually, not even that slowly. Well, it's kind of slow. I feel like when TikTok was still technically controlled and managed by China, that was our fastest period of growth. Ever since Trump started talking about banning TikTok, things have been on the downswing. Not really. That's not true. It's not that things have been on the downswing. That's just when I think the U.S. State Department started their clampdown on social media, which has just went whoosh, ramped through the roof with Biden and the Democrats taking power. This neoliberal class who's been fighting misinformation. That's their main goal, to fight misinformation so we can't, so Putin and Trump can't influence our elections. And that's also something we're going to talk about a lot today. Hey, Eddie. Hey. Anti-Oedipus says, hello, hello. Hey, hey, compulsive jaywalker. Be careful while you're out there jaywalking compulsively. Marcos Guevara, brother of Che. I used to watch TYT back in 2012 in the early days, but the Dem worship was too much. Yeah, I'm kind of proud. There were these. Well, I never got into TYT because they were popular when I was in like high school. Like you said, like 2012 is when I was first getting to high school. And I just kind of thought they were ridiculous. At the time, I've said this before. I was into like the Amazing Atheist, who was kind of like a Bernie bro plus anti SJW, like Ben Shapiro feminist wrecked politics. I was a young kid growing up in the rural Midwest, so don't judge me. But anyways, eventually I would find Kyle Kalinske, but at that time I thought TYT was like pretty lame, right? Because they pretty much, like I said, just focus on social issues, just talk about how evil the Republicans are. So I never fell into that, which is kind of a flex. But my number one flex is never falling into the Majority Report and Sam Cedar, because I would watch Kyle Kalinske and the Humanist Report and David Dole, and mostly Kyle, but all these new media figures, right? These social democratic progressives. But then and it seemed like they were all on the left. They were arguing for Medicare for all and increasing teachers' salaries, and I don't know, and ending the wars, all the stuff that Marxists care about or that I cared about. But then I would flip on the Majority Report, and I'll never forget, like, one of the top comments on one of the Majority Report's videos was, "What is this channel? All they ever do is talk shit about people." Because that's basically what it is. It's just like a political drama channel where they call everybody right wing while never advocating or really explaining left wing policies, because they aren't left wing. Sam Cedar was given an hour on MSNBC, and he spread Russiagate propaganda. He's the same as TYT, sort of a liberal or an MSNBC on YouTube. We need an Eddie teenage dirtbag TikTok. Any takers? Did y'all not? This is what I mean. This is why I say I'm getting suppressed. I made one. I made a teenage dirtbag TikTok. This is our content absolutely getting suppressed if y'all have not seen that. But we're going to watch it right now on stream then. Because the people get what the people want. This is socialism, baby.
It's the Lars, the Homeless Juggalo Show.
What? What did I just open up? Lars the Homeless Juggalo Show. All right. I've been going ham on the TikToks lately, actually. Trying to boost our content. Where is it? Yeah, I've made so many, I can't even find it. Where am I? Where am I as a teenage dirtbag? There it is. There you have it. There's young me. Bring back the mullet. Maybe eventually. I should. I like that mullet. I grew it out with one of my buddies. It was intimidating. It was just weird to do. Like, the mullet fits for wrestling, right? When you're at a wrestling tournament, everyone's like, "Hey, sick mullet, ha ha ha." But like talking to girls, talking to anybody, going in public, those are things that the mullet made difficult. So, and now I'm supposed to be an adult, so the best TikToker, Lady Ease the Har. Yes, she's the one who got me to do The teenage dirtbag video. Lady Izdahar is the best. You look at reactionary collapse stuff. You're looking at reactionary collapse stuff. I don't know what that means. Train track bottom teeth, kinda. I never had braces as a kid. What up, loser communist incel? Yeah. A good one. I've definitely never done the sex, and I'm an incel. You got me on that one. What do you think of recent accusations with Moppin? Yeah, we need to talk about that. We wanted to talk about it as an editorial board before we come public, so we don't say anything dumb. I have my thoughts about it, but I'm gonna save those. All I'll say for now is solidarity with anybody who was affected or um, assaulted in any way. And I do have relationships with some of the people who were directly involved, which is another thing. Um, I don't necessarily just want to use this situation for like YouTube drama and Twitch drama and views, but I do want to support those people who were involved. So, yeah, it's a rough situation. The mullet seems to come back every 20 years, at least, right? Democracy is now social democratic somewhat. They told the establishment line. We live in an entertainment empire. No one wants to understand anything. They just want to be entertained. Yeah, I think that sometimes too, and it drives me freaking nuts. This is like the number one thing that drives me crazy is entertainment imperialism. The way entertainment media not only raises money for war, like the Live Aid or Band Aid concerts where they give money to USAID, raise money for USAID by, doing a concert, but also just the hyper consumerism in the age of technology, where ad space is sold, where, basically a company makes money off your clicks and off your eyeballs. And everyone becomes surrounded, just, consume, 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 dopamine, 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 dopamine. To the point where I have a lot of kids on TikTok who tell me they literally cannot read. They physically cannot read because of their attention deficit. And I'm like, that is so not true. Because if you have I've been diagnosed with ADD, and I don't know if it's a real thing or if it's just a way to analyze how certain people are, how they function under capitalism or are unable to function under capitalism. That's basically what I think it is. But if you have that, you can hyper focus on stuff that you're interested in, right? If you get interested in something, you can go ham on it. Pretty much everyone I know who has a brain like that works that way. So you can read, right? It's just that right now, all your dopamine, all your attention is being sucked out of you by video games and social media, and honestly, stuff like TikTok. And I participate in all these things. I try and play video games in moderation. It's nothing wrong with having a Nintendo Switch, right? But yeah, don't let it get in the way of your will to understand the world. Because you can just live sensuously, right? Just consume, consume, consume. Whatever pleases my immediate senses is what I'm gonna, eat or watch or do. And that's what capitalism wants you to do, right? Don't organize, just shake your ass and buy new stuff. So yeah, it's something to overcome. And I think or Professor Hans George Muller's his analysis of authenticity and prophilicity is really good, and it kind of gets to the heart of part of the problem, in that the previous age before this one was an age of authenticity, where people tried to make their actions authentic to their identity or what they view their identity as. That's how people operate within neoliberal capitalism. So the age of authenticity, we all have this idea of what our identity is, and we all try and live up to that. And then with the technological era, we have a transformation into the age of prophilicity. So now, not only do you have this idea of your own identity in your head, but you have this idea of your identity as it's projected online, as it exists online. So everybody has an online profile, not only an Instagram and a Facebook, but you have a LinkedIn, which is tied to your career, tied to your interactions at the workplace, tied to your income. And people are still trying to be authentic, but not just authentic to their own identity now, but authentic to their profile. I have to live up to whatever my online profile is. And if, even though an online profile is basically just a highlight, right? It's a highlight of the best parts, the most exciting parts of everyone's lives. So it's impossible to live up to that day by day. And that can lead to depression. Comparing yourself to other people can lead to depression, isolation, and just obsession with social media. Because then once you start comparing yourselves to others on social media, but also trying to live up to this online identity, then not only are you thinking about social media when you're on it, which a lot of kids are, like 5 hours a day, but you're thinking about social media when you're off social media. Right. And that's when an addiction really starts to kick off. And I think that's what a lot of kids are dealing with now. So it's just good to understand that in the age of prophilicity that we live in making decisions and understanding your own life. I'm Cobra. Nobody can be me. Do you know how many people had to die for me to be me? Like, I will listen to an audiobook while I clean or exercise. That's good stuff too. Everybody has tactics, right? And like you can build into it. You can build into setting out, a block of your day where you're reading. One thing I do is listen to podcasts or I do my Duolingo. I'm learning Spanish right now. I'll put on a Duolingo podcast while I run. Um, you can listen to audiobooks in the car. For someone like me, it is easier for me to sit down at a desk with a pen in my hand and open a book and read it because I'm putting away all distractions, sitting down and focusing on that versus when I listen to an audiobook in the car. If it's a nonfiction book like some political theory, I constantly have to rewind it because I'm constantly getting distracted. Or just thinking about my own thing, versus when you have the physical book, you can think about your own thing and come back to where you were, versus the audiobook just keeps going. But yeah, those shorts and reels are addicting. It's insane. So I've tried to stop looking at them when I wake up out of bed. And unless I know it's a day where I want to make a lot of TikToks, then I'll literally open it when I get out of bed because I know then it's going to have an effect on my brain. Not only are they addicting, they make it impossible to get up out of your bed when you're scrolling through. But then your brain is thinking about them for like the rest of the day, thinking about opening shorts and reels or making them, filtering everything you see in real life. So how can I make that into a TikTok or whatever? Maybe this is just me because I've been creating videos on there for so long. But I try not to open it in the morning because it's addicting. You can even read the same thing 20 minutes in a day in the morning with the little red book and you're good, pretty much. Pretty freaking much. Personal opinion, most mental illnesses we have today are social phenomenons caused by capitalism. I think that's obviously nature versus nurture has always been a debate. But if you deny that environment has anything to do with it, right? Like there are people who are just like, depression exclusively comes from chemical imbalances in the brain, which, all the recent studies, including a meta-analysis of the most high profile studies on that, say that's not, a conclusive thing. That's not something doctors have come to a conclusion on and determined that it's just chemicals in the brain. But of course, brain makeup and your genetics might have something to do with it, make you more likely to be depressed. But someone could have the best genetics in the world, and be locked in a cellar for like 10 years and they're still going to be depressed, right? Like your environment is always going to have something to do with it at least. And in capitalism, everybody's alienated, everybody's exploited. People are confused and isolated. They're attached to their online profiles, all these different things. I find it more difficult to read Lenin or Engels, but when I'm reading Stalin, I finish a whole book fast while understanding everything. That's a really interesting comment, because some people, who are deep in the Marx and deep in the theory will say, like, read Lenin or Engels, they're easy. But they're not. They are not that easy. I mean, they're easier. They wrote short pamphlets, and Lenin, once you understand Marxism, Engels and Lenin are much more simple to understand than Marx, or the deeper stuff, at least Engels and Lenin's short stuff. But if you don't know what bourgeoisie or proletariat means, or the general theory of the dialectic, I remember the first like one or two times I read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, I barely got anything from it. So don't be afraid to read that boy Stalin or Mao. They condense things really, really well, and it pretty much all still holds up. People who tell you that Stalin was just stupid and he didn't understand Marxism and everything he wrote was dumb. Most of those people haven't read Stalin, and most of those people have only read like Western pseudo-Marxists like Marcuse and freaking Adorno and Horkheimer, who aren't Marxists at all. Actual Cold War anti-communist propaganda. Thank you, Jacob. I believe I have that on our list, for stuff to react to soon. Start with Parenti and work back. That's another good one. So actually, before we talk about TYT, I wanna pull up this really good interview that Max Blumenthal did with Tucker Carlson 5 years ago. So something that Max Blumenthal has been talking about lately, as to why these people like him, or even Glenn Greenwald, or whatever other anti-war, or like Jimmy Dore and other anti-war figures on the left have been going on Tucker. And a lot of people get mad at it and say, why are you going on Tucker Carlson? He's a right winger. He's a Fox News propagandist. But it's like there's a space now on the American right within the American Conservative Party, which is an oligarchic ruling class party. But there's a space where you can criticize empire, right? And this was even years ago when Trump was in office rather than Biden. And maybe they talk about Russiagate, and maybe Fox News had Blumenthal on to kind of make Trump look better. But either way, you can go on Fox News on some of their shows and give an anti-war message. You can't do that on MSNBC or CNN or any of these neoliberal Democratic establishment outlets. You'll be banned for life. You will be banned for life if you talk about Medicare for all, or ending the wars, or criticize the U.S. empire. Versus, the right, the neoconservatives on the right, the ruling right establishment in the U.S., the conservative establishment, of course, is not actually anti-war. Of course, they profit from the wars. Of course, they do the bidding of the military-industrial complex. That's what John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and the other generals and State Department officials appointed to the Trump administration did. Even if Trump said some anti-war stuff to the public. That's actually a kind of a good example of how they trick people into thinking they're anti-war. But, people like Blumenthal have been lambasted and attacked for going on shows like Tucker. And it's like, why not go to literally the most popular cable media news show in the country and spread an anti-war message? What, do we turn that down and say, no, I hate Tucker Carlson, he's a bad person, I'm not going to spread an anti-war message to the masses, even though he's giving me the opportunity? Okay, so then he's going to fill that time slot with something like fear-mongering about immigrants or whatever. And in reality, people are going to get more right-wing brainwashing rather than focusing on capitalism as the source and the driver of imperialism, which is what Blumenthal tries to point out here. And actually here, this is a different, Blumenthal points that out somewhere else in his interview with Chris Mott, which I recommend everybody check out. But here he's talking about Russiagate, and why Democrats were wrong about Russiagate from the beginning, which, now you can kind of say that after the Mueller report found out that Trump wasn't a Russian puppet, like Aaron Mate and the Grayzone and Kyle Kalinske and others were saying from the beginning. And we were saying from the beginning too. But at this time, it was very unpopular to come out against Russiagate. But Max does here on the show, and listen to what he says about how Russiagate is going to be utilized by the Democrats moving forward. Because he predicted a lot of interesting stuff in this interview from 2017. And keep in mind, this is 2017. 3 years earlier, less than 3 years earlier, the U.S. had just done a coup in Ukraine. The U.S. had just overthrown the more pro-Russian Ukrainian government, put in power a government subservient to the U.S.'s preferred neo-Nazi militias like the Azov Battalion, Right Sector, IDAR. Right Sector is a political party with a paramilitary wing, not a militia, but either way. Put those people in power, and then they tried to get Hillary to the presidency, someone who was a part of Obama's, sort of quote, squad, for lack of a better word, someone who's part of the Democratic establishment and part of this plan to threaten Russia, expand NATO, and use Ukraine as a proxy to do it. But then Trump wins the election in 2016. And Trump is a ding dong. Trump was an imperialist, but he was not part of the, Obama, Hillary Clinton wing of the political establishment. So they ganged up against Trump to get Trump out of there. And they did it by associating Trump with Russia and doing anti-Russia propaganda because they already wanted to attack Russia, right? NATO and the US finance capitalists had already, and the political elites like Clinton and Obama had already set their sights on Russia and China, which is why they did the coup in Ukraine in 2014. And Trump got in the way of their plans. He did it accidentally. He sort of bumbled his way into the White House. But he got in the way of Hillary Clinton for president and a war or a proxy war with Russia starting much earlier than it actually did. Shoot, y'all can't hear the video? That's so annoying. All right, one sec. One sec. Let me remove it and put it back up. All righty. Let me know if you can hear it now. I will be watching the chat.
Destructive and dangerous. Last month, Blumenthal took a camera to an anti-Russia protest on the National Mall here in Washington to find out what the people who were there actually knew about the topic. Here's part of the conversation, an amazing conversation he had with progressive Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin.
But you said that Roger Stone hosted a show on RT. Roger Stone hosted a series on the Russia Propaganda Network. Do you believe that we need... Roger Stone did...
All right, people can hear it good. I'm going to run to the bathroom because I got to pee, and then we'll restart the video. All right, I return. So, as I was talking about before, figures, anti-imperialist figures, especially journalists like Blumenthal or Glenn Greenwald, have been lambasted by the organized left for going on Tucker Carlson's show to spread anti-imperialist propaganda, anti-imperialist messaging. But Tucker has the most widely viewed cable news show in the U.S., so why not go on his show and use that platform to spread anti-imperialist politics? Because if not, then he's probably going to use that time slot to like bash immigrants or something. So might as well use the platforms that even our ideological enemies or ultimately supporters of capitalism like Tucker Carlson will give us. And I want people to pay attention when they're watching this. Pay attention to the way Max Blumenthal predicts that Russiagate will be used against the left. Yes, because they're talking about Russiagate here, and the Democrats pushing of this idea that Trump was Putin's puppet has been going on since he won the election in 2016 over corporate Hillary.
We hope you had a relaxing weekend, because our political class here in Washington did not. Instead of barbecuing with their children, maybe taking some time to solve the many problems this country faces, they were back on television fretting about the Russian takeover of America.
What do the Russians have politically, financially, and any personally on Donald Trump that he fawns over Putin? The American people have a right to know.
I do not want to see our democracy undermined by having the president of the United States colluding, and his officials colluding with Russia.
This love of Putin that this president is showing, and this defense of Putin that this president has done, and all of the other things that I've just alluded to, is unseemly.
We can also say that Donald Trump Jr., what he did was a threat to our democracy and borderline treason.
So keep in mind, this was 2017. So in 2014, the U.S. had successfully carried out a coup in Ukraine. There was a more pro-Russian president who was put in power in Ukraine, or came to power in Ukraine by election. He wanted to remove Stefan Bandera, the Ukrainian nationalist and Hitler collaborator, from Ukraine's list of national heroes. And previously, the Russian language had been outlawed by a nationalist president, even though there are many, many, many Russian speakers, especially in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the Russian language had been made illegal, but this president was going to legalize it again. That's who the U.S. overthrew. Yanukovych, I believe his name was, backing the U.S.'s preferred neo-Nazi militias or political parties like Aidar, Azov Battalion, Right Sector, a very anti-Russian government, because it's been the State Department and the finance capitalists and NATO's plan for a long time to attack Russia. For a long time, their focus has been shifting towards Russia and China. Those are the two major threats to U.S. hegemony and U.S. power as they see it on the global stage right now. So this plan of using Ukraine as a proxy to attack Russia, has been in the works for a long time. And the U.S. made a very important step in the proxy war direction when they overthrew the Ukrainian government, which basically started a war on the Donbass region, this region in eastern Ukraine with many, many Russian speakers who see themselves basically as ethnic Russians, who then came into conflict with the U.S.-backed and armed neo-Nazis. So it was the liberal Democrats, the State Department's plan to attack Russia, and then Trump wins election in 2016. He defeats Hillary Clinton. So after Hillary Clinton, who was part of the Obama administration, and Obama and all those establishment Democrats overthrew the Ukrainian government to do a proxy war against Russia, they want Hillary Clinton to take power in 2016 and continue to follow through, continue to threaten Russia. But Donald Trump bumbles his way into the White House. And yes, Donald Trump was an imperialist. Yes, Donald Trump was a capitalist. But Donald Trump was an outsider. Donald Trump was not a part of the ruling political class who only serves finance capital, the bankers and capitalist oligarchs. So the convenient thing for the Democrats to do then was Russiagate, was to not only attack Trump, but attack Russia as well. They killed two birds with one stone. So they could get this outsider out of the White House, do constant propaganda about him, talk about him as a puppet of Putin, and also make Russia out to be evil interventionist, Russia and Putin, meddling in others' elections, no morals. So then when Joe Biden gets elected in 2020, the war with Russia continues. The proxy war in Ukraine continues, and we've seen it escalate into, now a horrible war that's left, thousands of people dead, as all the U.S. expansionist efforts seem to do. But yeah, Russiagate looks a little bit different now, looking back in hindsight, which is part of the reason why I wanted to watch this interview from 2017.
Borderline treason. Well, Max Blumenthal is an author, a journalist, and a lifelong man of the left. Yet he's become skeptical of the Russian collusion narrative, which he has called destructive and dangerous. Last month, Blumenthal took a camera to an anti-Russia protest on the National Mall here in Washington to find out what the people who were there actually knew about the topic. Here's part of the conversation, an amazing conversation he had with progressive Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin.
But you said that Roger Stone hosted a show on RT. Roger Stone hosted a series on the Russia Propaganda Network. Do you believe that we need... Roger Stone didn't host a show on RT. You think he's never been on an RT? But he didn't host a show. Okay, well, look, you can go after any picayune details you want, but I don't see why it would be in your interest to support an autocratic authoritarian government which is jailing journalists and fighting against freedom around the world. I think we should tell the people the truth.
Max Blumenthal joins us in studio. I love that exchange because it's simple.
That's funny how they cut to Max Blumenthal smiling at his own work. He's like, yeah, I owned that guy. These political careerists are so ridiculous. And for those who don't know, Max's dad, Sid Blumenthal, is like a friend of Hillary Clinton, Democratic establishment elite. So, and you can tell with his analysis, like he knows these people personally, or he knows sort of how the Democratic establishment works and the imperialist establishment works, and, who's involved and who's doing what. And he calls them out by name. It's very interesting, his origin story.
Similar to so many I've had on this show, where if you call into question the facts being asserted, you're immediately accused of being a handmaiden to Vladimir Putin. So let me just ask the broadest possible question. You're not a Trump voter or supporter. You're a lifelong man on the left, I think it's fair to say, pretty well-known one. And yet you don't think that this Russia story is helpful to the left or makes sense. Why?
Yeah, I mean, we have to talk about the issue of efficacy also, in addition to the fact that I haven't seen any concrete evidence and Rachel Maddow's dots may never connect. And so, as someone on the left who's actually gone out and protested Trump, I didn't expect this hysteria to completely take over, but now I see what the point is of it. I see Trump as the apotheosis of a failed political establishment, both from the Democrats and the Republicans, pushing corporate trade, pushing permanent war. And I thought the Democrats should have responded with a big narrative against permanent war and for economic equality. Instead, they're pushing Russia scandal-mongering nonstop. It subsumed all of the progressive grassroots movements I believed in, and it's basically buried the left in a militaristic narrative that ambitious figures like Jamie Raskin are advancing. Mark my words, Tucker, when Trump is gone, this narrative, this Russia hysteria will be repurposed by the political establishment to attack the left and anyone on the left. Bernie Sanders-like politician who steps out of line on the issues of permanent war or corporate free trade, things like that.
Did everybody hear that? That's the main part I wanted people to see. Listen to that again.
Movements I believed in, and it's basically buried the left in a militaristic narrative that ambitious figures like Jamie Raskin are advancing. Mark my words, Tucker, when Trump is gone, this narrative, this Russia hysteria will be repurposed by the political establishment to attack the left and anyone on the left. Bernie Sanders-like politician who steps out of line on the issues of permanent war or corporate free trade, things like that, will be painted as a Russia puppet. So this is very dangerous, and people who are progressive, who are falling into it, need to know what the long-term consequences of this cynical narrative are.
It seems virtually every...
And there were so many who, at least at the time, were considered on the left, like Sam Cedar of the Majority Report, who we talked about earlier, TYT, who just jumped on the Russiagate bandwagon because they saw it as a way to be anti-Trump, a way against Trump and the Republicans. They're bad, right? But as Max Blumenthal says here, that narrative has been completely repurposed and used to smear anybody who is against U.S. interventionism in Russia, or who is against the U.S. actions in Ukraine, or the U.S. efforts to wage a proxy war against Russia, or NATO deciding in their summit that Russia and China are the number one enemies of the U.S. State Department going forward. This is the kind of imperialist, pro-capitalist stuff that people are using this, you're a Putin puppet accusation to justify. This narrative that was pushed for 6 years by MSNBC, CNN, and every corner of the Democratic establishment, that Trump was a puppet of Russia and that Putin wants to destroy the U.S., is now being used to wage wars for capitalist expansion and the enrichment of the military-industrial complex, and try and destroy a sovereign nation. Which Max Blumenthal saw this coming, what, 6 years ago? 5-6 years ago, he said this, that the imperialist establishment is going to repurpose this, calling people puppets of Russia in favor of imperialism, and utilize it for imperialism. And what do we have now? I lost my TikTok account with 400,000 subscribers because people were calling me a Putin puppet. Putin, who I probably hadn't said anything good about in my life till that point. But it's a very, very convenient narrative for shutting down dissent, which they've been building up and working on for years, because they've known they were going to attack Russia for years.
Everyone on the left in Washington, with some exceptions. You're one, I know a couple others. But I know people who I think of as reasonable, I don't agree with them, but who seem to really believe that Vladimir Putin was in control of the last election. Do you think they believe it?
I don't know. I think I can't speak for other people. I'm not a mind reader, but there's definitely a political class in Washington that sees Russia scandal mongering as a silver bullet to take out Trump. And then you have the Democrats, who are basically the Democratic establishment that came in and took out Keith Ellison, the corporate sellout establishment that can't agree on a big economic message, right, that doesn't favor single payer. So this is just convenient because this gives them a way of opposing Trump without having to do anything remotely progressive.
And that's all I thought Russiagate was at first, right? I didn't know it was part of this broader imperialist strategy to attack Russia. I hadn't been paying attention to what NATO was saying about how they're shifting focus towards Russia and China, at least not this early. Maybe if I was a Marxist, I would have been. But basically, I just thought it was a way to attack Trump without having to talk about economics, right? We can attack Trump over Russia, and then we don't have to attack him over what he's actually doing or how he's not helping the working class. And which it was that, but it was also part of this broader imperialist strategy. And someone said earlier, this is the same thing as Hillary's emails. It really is. That's such a good comparison, because the Republicans would be like, oh, Hillary doesn't know how to work an email. She allowed her leaked emails got Americans killed. She sucks. And they're talking about Benghazi and Libya. And when Hillary oversaw personally the NATO intervention in Libya, which threw the country into a total disaster, brought it from, one of the highest, if not the highest standard of living in Africa per person under Gaddafi, and took it to a country destroyed by civil war, violence everywhere. Poverty came back to Libya. There was an open air slave market because they essentially were left with no central government. The U.S. essentially had no plan other than overthrow Gaddafi. The U.S. and Hillary Clinton had no plan other than that. So they just, overthrew him and then left the country in a terrible power vacuum, which cost U.S. taxpayers millions and millions and millions of dollars. And they lied and lied and lied and lied about it every step of the way. And then Republicans are like, oh, Hillary doesn't know how to work an email server. That's what she did wrong in Benghazi and Libya. Like, what about destroying the whole country with your tax dollars? What about trying to keep the whole world in poverty so she can enslave them? Is that not something to criticize her for? That's more worthy of criticism than the emails. So Russiagate and Hillary's emails, the two dumbest arguments to come out of the American political establishment in years. But two arguments that make sense if you understand the broader context of imperialism. The Republicans were probably just mad at Hillary's emails for leaking because it exposed all their war crimes.
It's a little bit surprising from a perspective of someone in the media to see big news organizations full of smart people who I thought were pretty skeptical in a good way refuse to ask any of the basic questions, and instead, when you press them, say, well, some number of intelligence agencies said so. I haven't seen the evidence, but I believe them. When did that change? What is that about?
Yeah, I mean, you see a bootlicking press and a bootlicking kind of liberal opposition that believes all intelligence agencies and doesn't ask questions from these anonymous officials. I mean, you'll see on CNN a segment, U.S. officials say Russian spying is ramping up. I don't know, are Russian spies taking Adderall now? But there's never any clear sourcing never any sources on the record. And then we see stories retracted, like that the Russians hacked into our national electricity grid. Then the Washington Post said it was Burlington, Vermont's electricity grid. Then they retracted the story. So it's very hard to keep track of it. But what they've done with this scandal mongering, in addition to kind of pushing away a progressive narrative, is create the sense among a lot of people who don't have time to pay attention that there is Russian collusion, that we were attacked by Russia, and that we actually have to respond, if not with expanded sanctions, which I think is very dangerous and harms average people, but with a military response. We just saw Paul Begala on CNN calling for blowing up the Russian intelligence.
And you've seen members of Congress call this an act of war. Finally, you're a pretty, not just a member of the left, but pretty fairly well known. What kind of response have you received after saying things like this in public?
Well, I'll probably get called a Putin puppet after this show. I mean, that's pretty much all they can say, but I'd like to have a debate about the evidence. I would like to talk about the evidence behind this, but I also want to talk about whether it's a good idea to support Democrats like Ben Cardin, who are saying that this is a political Pearl Harbor and we should respond, whether it's a good idea to expand NATO into little countries like Montenegro, whether it's a good idea to be funding jihadist proxies in Syria to hurt Russia. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times called for supporting territorial ISIS in Syria to hurt Russia and Iran. And that's where this narrative is leading. It seems to be, from a purely progressive, anti-war, anti-imperial position, a disastrous narrative that will have long-term consequences for the left in this country.
And there's no debate. So my son will be required to give his life to defend the territorial integrity of Montenegro?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe we should debate it, but we're not.
Yeah.
Rex Blumenthal, that was...
He was right about everything. He called it. He went on Tucker Carlson's show and called it. And like Nam Trin says here, yeah, and people are going to be like, why would you go on Tucker's show? That means you're a right-winger. Because he's going on the largest cable news show in the country and telling people truthfully that Russiagate is BS and that Russiagate is going to be used to push for imperialism. And exactly what he predicted in this video has been what's played out. Russia has been used, the Russiagate narrative has been repurposed and used to not only justify imperialism in this endless proxy war in Ukraine, but also to silence anybody who dissents and anybody who criticizes the US or NATO's actions in leading to this conflict and creating this deadly, disastrous war that's going on in Ukraine. And the one last thing I like is that he brings up how the Democratic establishment and the Democratic media in their articles, they'll just quote the intelligence agency as if it's facts. You know, that means like the CIA and the FBI, the people who did Operation Condor and filtered Nazis into positions of power within the U.S. government and U.S. oligarchy, and the people who have been censoring our media and censoring academia and carrying out violent, deadly coups in foreign countries for years. And Democrats now just trust these people. Well, the intelligence community told us this. It has something bad about Trump in here, so it's got to be true. You know, let's just believe everything the CIA says. They'll literally be like, the intelligence community has determined, like they'll just call it the intelligence community because that sounds a little better. Like, oh, you mean the murderous, imperialist armed bodies of the state that are the FBI and the CIA? Gotcha. I'll be sure to believe those guys. They have a great track record. It's kind of crazy. There was one, oh yeah, and then even when Trump was president, they'd be like, you know, Trump is a disgrace because he's going against the intelligence community. Like, that's not what makes him a disgrace. Him putting sanctions back on Cuba, the embargo back on Cuba after Obama had repealed it only because he was pressured publicly by the Pope, who called him out for murderously strangling a small island country off the U.S.'s southern border. But Trump put it back on because he was pressured by right-wing Miami Cubans, a.k.a. Gusanos. And then, you know, I'm saying that's the kind of murderous stuff he's done, the imperialist stuff he's done. Not going against the intelligence community, not going against the CIA. That's a good thing. That's what JFK did that got him murdered, if we're being honest. I kind of have to pee again, y'all. There is absolutely no difference between Obama and Trump. I mean, I disagree slightly because, like, the political circus is a circus, right? And what they say is different than what they do. And you need to pay attention to what they say and what they do to understand what their plans are. Like with Russiagate, you know, Max Blumenthal was paying attention to the U.S. proxy war in Syria, the coup in Ukraine, the shifting focus of U.S. imperialism towards Russia. So that helped them understand the Russiagate narrative on a much deeper level than most people did at the time. But the two parties are different. They do represent different sections of the working class. And Trump especially was different because he was a political outsider, because he wasn't part of the political establishment. So even though he wasn't pro-working class or anti-imperialist, and the establishment was basically able to control him more or less, he was an outsider, sort of bucked the norm. The establishment would have rather had Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton as president in 2016. So the better way to look at the parties rather than just like the same thing, right? The Democratic and Republican parties in the United States, they're a dialectic. They're a unity of opposites. So they are opposites, at least on social issues, but they're unified in that they both serve the ruling class. They both serve the imperialist elite and the financial oligarchs. You know, so they fight and they interpenetrate, and at times one is winning over the other. And there are real divisions within these two parties and the people that make them up. But ultimately, their fighting leads to nothing. And one side winning over the other side leads to nothing except for imperialist expansion and capitalist expansion, because ultimately they serve the ruling class, even though they are technically different in how they function. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually. How do we actually interpret the U.S. State Department and the U.S. ruling class? Biden is slightly worse than Trump, in my opinion. I would agree. I think that Trump accidentally kind of got in the way of the imperialist strategies that were being carried out for years, right? So, like we said, this U.S. proxy war, sort of increased aggression or new Cold War, if you want to call it, even though just like the old Cold War, it's not actually cold, right? There is actually fighting going on. It's just done via proxy. You know, it's done in Ukraine or Vietnam or Korea instead of, you know, in U.S. and Russia. But Biden is a part of that, or he's controlled by the oligarchs who want that, the ones who are most pushing for war with Russia, and he's been a part of the political establishment like his whole life. So they know they can control him. You know, he's been doing the bidding of the ruling class for years. You know, so he's ultimately just a puppet. Versus, yeah, like I said, Trump accidentally got in the way of the imperialists a few times. So, but that, like, they were mostly able to block him, which one shows how even if Bernie would have become the president or someone like that, and Bernie is pro-war in Ukraine too, but even if we got like a real fighter for the working class in the position of president, it'd be hard to do anything because the State Department, Pentagon, and both of the parties would team up to stop you from doing anything. And also it showed that, you know, Trump was a charlatan. He was a liar. He never knew how he was going to bring back jobs to the working class. He never knew how he was going to end imperialism, because one person can't do that. It takes a mass movement. Take socialism. Socialism is the only thing that truly combats imperialism because it targets capital. And at the end of the day, who is driving imperialism? It's not even the political class like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. They are controlled by the finance capitalists. They are controlled by capital. It is capital, which stems from private property, and private property's protection by the state stems from liberalism, which drives imperialism. Under capitalism, there's other kinds of imperialism that existed previously. JB Font is in here. What's up? How do you pronounce your name, Jay? I love your guys' channel. Everyone, please go check out Revolutionary Blackout Network. Jay says, hello, I'm enjoying the channel. Thanks for all the love to us at RBN. For sure, y'all are doing amazing work. Amazing work. And there are a lot of people who I think are doing good work right now. But Revolutionary Blackout Network might be my favorite, where I might think y'all are doing the best, because it's the mutual aid stuff and the education about mutual aid and community organizing is so important. So important for showing people how to actually, JB Fun is the pronunciation. All right, I got it. Nice. But there's so many people, who watch our content and who watch left-wing content, but they're not sure of the next step, what to actually do, especially after the Bernie campaign failed to bring about anything. So mutual aid and community organizing is about as good as it gets. And that's what RBN are educating people about, which is great. And then, at this point, I look for people who are wary to how wokeism is used to justify capitalism and imperialism. And Revolutionary Blackout Network have always called that out from step one or day one. They're always calling out the shit libs. So everyone, please go check them out. I'll actually pull up their channel here so we can look at it. It's for real. Y'all need to be following them. I've said this before with like Ramiro's show, Ramiro Sebastian Funes. There's accounts or channels that I call out or shout out because I know that they're good, but I don't necessarily watch them all the time because they're just not the kind of content that I'm into. It's all about building community. That's what will help us. Absolutely. Right. It's all about a mass movement, and cohesion in that mass movement, and organization in that mass movement, and the ability to act as many but also as one, to act collectively but also towards one goal, and be focused in our actions and be purposeful in our actions. And that can only stem from building community at the grassroots level. It's just so freaking important, which again, that's why I love RBN. But RBN and Ramiro Sebastian Funes are like two of the YouTube channels that I actually watch. And you can see here I've watched their video with Max Blumenthal. I've watched some of these other ones on my personal YouTube channel too. So yeah, that's like the highest compliment I can give. I actually watch their YouTube videos. I don't just know that they're good. Yeah. RBN, check them out. I'm reading theory on my channel to grow so I can apply it more. Nice. That's a great idea. Some of my favorite videos that we've done have been me breaking down Imperialism by Lenin as I was reading it, or breaking down State and Revolution. Because, like you said, not only I didn't read it to people, I just summarized it and stuff, but that really helped me understand the content. It helped me understand the ideas because you learn through teaching. So yeah, sounds like a great idea. What happened to Ben Norton? He just had a fight with like Jackson Hinkle and the other people associated with Jackson, kind of. We must come together in a common understanding of life and the common good. Agreed. And that's how I feel about Jackson Hinkle and Ben Norton fighting. We must come together in a common understanding of life. Thank you, Timothy. Reading Dirty Truths by Parenti and Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. I haven't heard of Blood in My Eye. But obviously I'm a huge Parenti fan, but sounds interesting. Maybe I'll have to check those videos out, actually. Speaking of Parenti, is that what we want to do next? Nah. Actually, let's talk about the TYT thing next. TYT attacking Briana Grayjoy. Briana Joy Gray, not Grayjoy, I think. And actually, this is an RBN video that I have pulled up. Wow, what a coincidence. I didn't even realize that. I thought I just had the video of TYT talking to Briana. But RBN, Nick of RBN had Max Blumenthal on, so we're doing two Max Blumenthals in a row. But he had him on to react to this interview by TYT. And I don't know, if people haven't seen this yet, it's freaking ridiculous. Chunk Ogre is such a turd, dude. He's such a liberal, condescending, egotistical turd. So he had Briana Grayjoy on his show, to Bernie's former press secretary, one of the only people who has gone away from, super liberalized, super individualistic, super wokeist politics. One of the only high profile Bernie people to move away from that and stay focused on class and stay focused on organizing the workers and whatnot. So people always give her credit, though. They say, she's the only Bernie staffer who didn't sell out, who didn't become a shit lib. I worked for Bernie. I wasn't his press secretary, but I was an intern, and I didn't sell out. I became a Marxist. So I want my credit. Max Blumenthal in this video says, or even Nick, I think, says, where'd all the Bernie people go? They're all shit libs now. No, we're not. I'm still here, baby. But yeah, most of them did become shit libs. You're right.
There's actually three buckets. There's the bucket in the middle where we don't agree. I don't agree with some people saying they're on the left, right? So Ukraine, for example, questioning the amount of funding that's going to Ukraine totally makes sense. I believe Ukraine is in the right, but hey, whenever we ask for anything at home, we never get it. But as soon as defense contractors are going to make money off of it, we're spending billions. And that isn't necessarily even going to Ukraine. So I find that legitimate. But then when you get the gray zones, and I hate saying, the Ukrainians are terrorists for fighting back against the Russians. How dare they kill the Russian soldiers? They literally said it. Jimmy did a video about how the Ukrainian civilians were terrorists for firebombing the tanks that were coming to blow up their house.
Wait, he talked about Jimmy Dore and me at the same time. I don't know what Jimmy said, but
it's so absurd. Chunk Ogre is so absurd, dude. Like, okay, Briana Grayjoy, I get what you're saying. The U.S. is sending millions of dollars to Ukraine. We don't even know where a lot of those weapons are going. They're ending up on the black market, but a lot might be ending up in the hands of extremists and neo-Nazis. And of course, the U.S. is only doing this because it makes money for the military-industrial complex, as living standards are getting worse day by day back home, and there's a cost of living crisis globally. I understand that, but then when you start to bring in the Jimmy Dore and the Grayzone, and Brianna's like, "What? Why don't you talk to me?" And Jank starts to freak out. What Jimmy literally said last week that Putin firebombed the tank, and as Blumenthal says, he was talking about the gray zone and how Brianna's a bad person because she's associated with the gray zone, and then justifies that by saying, something that Jimmy Dore said. So let's follow the steps here in the mind of Chunk Ogre. He's like, okay, I don't like Briana Grayjoy because she's associated with the gray zone, who I don't like because I associate them with something Jimmy Dore said last week. And I'm going to bring that up to Briana Grayjoy as if and expect her to defend herself or to do something about it. And there's no argument here besides invoking Jimmy Dore in the gray zone. All he said was, Jimmy Dore and the gray zone are associated with you. Therefore, that's why I think you're a right winger now. You're the one who is busting unions at your own workplace, Jank. You're the one who won't fight for Medicare for all or any actual left-wing economic policies. But then we're supposed to believe that she is the right winger because she's associated with the gray zone who call out the imperialists? Sure. The logic of American liberals, everyone.
I think I maybe don't watch as much Jimmy Dore as you might, but I do listen to Aaron Mate and Katie Halper's show. I do hear him in that context. I do see clips from Grayzone people and things like that. I had Max Blumenthal on the show, and my understanding is that there are these specific instances in which there's not reporting on the West about various skirmishes, about the presence, even if you think it's too minor to talk about, but the presence of Nazi and right-wing groups in the context
that's what I'm talking about, Brianna. You're validating insane right-wing talking points. So
but wait a minute,
it's a right-wing talking point.
Jank, what is IDAR? What is Azov? What is right sector? Do you have any idea what any of these are? Or do you just say, they're not right wing anymore? Once the US and the US intelligence agencies started giving weapons to them, they just stopped being neo-Nazis. Those are all neo-Nazi political parties or militias. That's not me calling them neo-Nazis. They call themselves neo-Nazis. And not everybody in those militias, not everybody in the Ukrainian military is a Nazi. But since the US-backed 2014 coup, yes, that has been the leadership. The leadership of the military has been people from these neo-Nazi sections. This is a fact. This is a fact, but this is how the liberal mind works. And this is how they keep themselves in a freaking echo chamber. That's almost unbelievable to those of us who actually think. Even if you just say that, if you just say, there's funding of extremist elements in Ukraine, something that the US has done pretty much in every proxy war ever. In 2019, they funded the far-right fascists in Bolivia. You only have to go a few years back to see a time where they're funding fascists for their own political interests. But you even just bring it up that the U.S. is funding extremists and these liberals like Cenk have a meltdown. Ah, Putin talking points. Putin. When Max Blumenthal 5 or 6 years ago, in the video we just watched, said, liberals are going to use Russiagate, or he's a puppet of Putin, to critique or shut down people who are anti-war or who are people who are anti-US empire. And that's exactly what Cenk is doing now, because he is an individualist lib. All right, we'll watch a little more of this. I sort of feel weird. It's like I'm reacting to a reaction video. It's like reactception. So we won't watch too much, but a little more.
To be against Nazis.
No, that's a Vladimir Putin talking point as a justification for attacking them.
But for Cenk, I mean, there's a credibility issue here, because if you mischaracterize other people's arguments, I think there's a legitimate reason to have a
credibility issue. I've never seen Grayzone not agree with Vladimir Putin. They are.
Let her talk. And they're they love this Putin thing because they're incapable of real arguments. All right, okay, let's discuss what was one of the Grayzone articles that you have an issue with, Cenk. She's just calm. Like, they literally, Vladimir Putin, literally Putin. Literally, like if he bulges his veins enough and yells Putin enough, or the word literally Putin, then that's an argument. But I think he's trying to cover for his lack of substance, the fact that he doesn't know anything and he has no real argument against the Grayzone, with just emotion and interrupting Briana. Don't stop saying facts and words, okay? Literally Putin, okay? Okay, Cenk, you are a genius.
They're total and utter puppets for him.
Jesus, fuck, you guys. Where do we even start with that? You guys see this meltdown?
Well, it's like
those all the. Man? There's so much to say there.
That was my first time seeing it, and like I feel more disgusted than the reaction video I did to Two Girls, One Cup after watching Cenk sweating and bloviating. I mean, what? Like, don't I deserve better enemies than Chunk Ogre, the washed up MSNBC failure who can barely form a coherent sentence? And if you look at what he's doing, he's avoiding the issues by using the Grayzone to appeal to the prejudices of his normie brain dead viewership. And if you're still watching TYT at this point, I just don't. I mean, why not just at least get a higher production value with MSNBC and watch like David Plouffe with a slightly better background than Cenk?
For real. And Blumenthal goes on to talk about how TYT is corporate funded now. But there's one thing that Nick said that I want to skip to here, because they're talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. So they're talking about this sort of space on the Republican Party that I was talking about, or within the Republican establishment, where they do allow people to criticize war and, allow people to criticize the imperialist establishment and this sort of proxy war against Russia and this increasing hostility towards Russia, similar to what Max did on Tucker Carlson's show that we just talked about. But there's no room for this on the left. So you have, these goofy ass figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are saying, the US is funding extremists in Ukraine rather than helping people here at home. She's completely right. But then the left is having a panic attack about this. Marjorie Taylor Greene's evil. She said the US is doing a proxy war in Ukraine. It's like, she is. But now the people who are supposed to be on the left are in favor of the imperialist proxy war. And the people who are the most far right, who the people on the left call fascists, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, are against the war. It's like we're living in the Twilight Zone. But of course, it makes sense because the liberal establishment has never been left, and most of the ones who portrayed themselves as leftists were never left. They were imperialists. But something Nick says when they're talking about that is he says that he thinks Marjorie Taylor Greene is like a psyop. Which is a really interesting idea. I mean, I don't know if he presents any evidence for it, but I want to talk about that idea more here. One sec.
Shortage, and she voted against it. I don't honestly think these people are good faith actors, but I think it's a psyop by the establishment. So you get Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, because they all voted no on the Ukraine package, and they are the bad guys, right? Meanwhile, you have Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad, Charles Booker. These people all go in on Ukraine because they are given the perceived image of being the good guys. So they want to trick people. Hey, Bernie Sanders is going for Ukraine aid. Bernie Sanders is calling Putin evil. Bernie Sanders isn't questioning NATO, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Do you see what the theory I'm getting at? So they want people.
So I accidentally skipped right to it. That was awesome. But yeah, he says it's a psyop, and I don't know, but yeah, now you have, like I said, this sort of Twilight Zone reversal where these people like Bernie and AOC, who promised us they were the left, are supporting the main thrust of the U.S. empire right now in their proxy war in Ukraine, and supporting spending millions and millions of dollars to send weapons there as inflation increases and standard of living decreases for the American masses, whose taxes are largely going to flip the bill for this war. And then you have folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene who are like, if you're anti-war, come be a Republican, come vote for the GOP. And maybe it's honest, maybe it's just kind of coincidental. Maybe these conspiracy nuts like Marjorie Taylor Greene sort of accidentally stumbled into the right position. But what Nick's saying is that it's potentially a psyop.
Someone asked me to do a video about the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh a while back, and I don't remember.
Oops, I accidentally played two videos at once instead of just the one I wanted. But this is about Jordan Peterson as a mirror of wokeism by Hans Georg Muller, who has this really good philosophy of wokeism, meaning, the use of identity politics and the use of identity and liberal individualism to distract from socialism, to distract from actual leftism. And his example that he uses as a mirror of wokeism, as someone who sort of mirrors this liberal woke ideology, is Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson, whereas the liberals, saying that anybody who is anti-war and anti-imperialist is sexist and misogynist and anti-LGBTQ, using these social issues to justify imperialism on the so-called left, Jordan Peterson's the mirror of that on the right. So he said, society's falling apart because of these liberals, because of this wokeness, because of political correctness, and the answer is to be right-wing, to be conservative when it comes to social issues. And he never says, the answer is to struggle for socialism, right? The answer is to struggle for material gains, which actually bring power to the working class and take power away from the oligarchs. We need to take power or political power from this oligarchy who buys every election and uses the State Department to carry out imperialist action all over the world. He never says that. He never critiques empire or capitalism because he loves capitalism and he loves empire and he loves Western society the way it is. It's allowed him to get rich. But those darn wokes, those darn liberal wokes, they're really evil. And if we allow them to keep doing what they're doing, they're going to keep making everyone poor and sending all your money overseas. And, it has nothing to do with the structure, the material structure of the capitalist system. It's all those darn woke liberals and their PC culture. So you keep people fighting, both the wokists and the mirror of wokists, They're fighting and fighting and fighting over nothing. They're literally just spinning their wheels because neither of them has an actual plan for construction, an actual plan for getting better. Neither of them are criticizing capitalism as a structural system as it exists now, or neoliberal capitalism. None of them are arguing for socialism or for organization, right? They're just pointing at the other ruling class party, the other party who serves their corporate donors and their imperialists and finance capital, and saying it's their fault. Vote for our party, when both parties serve the same interests. So Marjorie Taylor Greene is just an example of one of these mirrors of wokeism. So I wouldn't be surprised if she was like a psyop, and even if she's not a psyop, to what Nick said, she serves the same purpose, right? She serves the same function as a psyop designed to keep people divided and keep people fighting. She serves the function of a mirror of wokeism. Don't criticize capitalism. Don't criticize your boss. Don't look at the finance capitalists and the military industrial complex and the State Department and the intelligence agencies and how they all work together. Don't look at that. Don't organize with your class. Just watch Jordan Peterson videos and clean your room and hate liberals and vote Republican every year. And eventually everything will be perfect. Matt Walsh is another one of these sort of characters. I made a video about him. But within and Matt Walsh pretends gender ideology is what is leading to society's collapse. And yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene is sort of one of those, not within media or new media or YouTube or online, but within the American political establishment. So I just thought that was a really good point from Nick that I wanted to talk about there. I'm going to put you in timeout. Midwestern March 2036 soon. We'll be running for office real soon, maybe. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to bring up that I had written down about the TYT, Briana Joy Gray, Jimmy Dore, Grayzone thing is, one, how do people still watch TYT? How do people still watch the YouTube edition or YouTube version of MSNBC? But two, it shows that corporate media or corporate money has fully, come in control of these new media spaces. People like me are still allowed to have an audience. We're allowed to post, but we're not going to have our content boosted, and it'll probably be suppressed by the algorithm in some way. And then we just don't have the production value or the money going into our content that these corporate YouTube creators have, or these YouTube networks allow for. And of course, they're not going to allow for anti-war, anti-imperialist journalism. So we got to stay independent. And the internet, and I would say this sort of like when they started pushing for net neutrality, that was sort of the last nail in the coffin as for the internet, as sort of this wild west of free speech. Whatever is popular is what blows up. Versus this sort of very structured corporate hierarchy that you have outside of the internet in terms of capitalism. And now corporate money has flowed into this sort of wild west, flowed into these internet spaces and gained further control of, even of like music and the commodification of music, but especially news, politics, stuff like that. It's no longer just absolute free speech, especially with all the misinformation stuff and, constantly trying to take down what people are posting, label it as Putin propaganda. The political class and the oligarchs do not allow for free speech on the internet anymore. Leave a thumbs up and share this stream. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jay. Please do. Sometimes I forget to remind people. I always forget to remind people, actually. Should actually throw up a banner at the bottom. What are we going to talk about next? We can talk about Nina Turner next. I'm trying to cover more news, y'all. I know people are into the political news cycle. It's not my favorite thing to cover, but it is interesting. I just only like to cover it when something that I think is worth pointing out happens. I don't want to cover the news just because it's the news and we're supposed to be into politics. Imagine having anti-Jimmy Dore mods in a Midwestern Marks chat. Who's that? Who's anti-Jimmy Dore? I like Jimmy. Jimmy Dore is pretty good overall. He's like, I think Jimmy should run for president. He's left wing on all the policies, you know, he's left wing on all the imperialist policies too. And he's got like millions of people who watch his show. He's got like over 1 million subscribers. Sort of like Russell Brand. Russell Brand is like 3 million subscribers right now. And I know he's not a Marxist, but that's crazy how many people that watch him and hear him talk about Medicare for all and imperialism and finance capital and corruption. All of these things that people need to know about. He said he won't run in a recent episode. Dang it. I think he should. I'm not pro Jimmy. Well, we'll get into that conversation here as we're talking about Nina Turner. But first, I got to go to the bathroom again. I'm sorry, y'all. I keep having to go pee. Jimmy Dore destroyed by Nina Turner in his lazy quest for content. This is the TYT video. And I have Black Revolutionary Network talking about Jimmy Dore again. I guess I'm just using all their content today. All right, we'll talk about Jimmy in a sec. I got to go to the bathroom. BRB. Sorry, I was muted. I have returned. Is it frozen on a picture of Jimmy Dore for anyone else? Sorry, I was just gone. But this is what I want to talk about. This is actually on Jimmy Dore's show. So this is from Jimmy's show, where he covered Revolutionary Blackout Network, who we watched in the last video. He covered what they had to say about it. But basically, Nina Turner, progressive, somebody who I really liked when she worked for the Bernie campaign, because I thought she called out her Bernie's corporate opponents in a way that Bernie couldn't. And now she said that Jimmy Dore is repackaging right-wing talking points. That's all he does on his show. So obviously, I've said I disagree with this. We have some people in the chat who are anti-Jimmy and don't see him as a force for good or a force for socialism or the working class. So this will be an interesting video to talk about.
So I don't know if you don't want to bury the league, but Nina Turner went off the rails the other day on Twitter, calling anybody who criticized her an anti-black racist. And let's just remember what she used to say about me.
And my husband, Jimmy Dore, will be interviewing you too.
Oh, and I missed
Jimmy Dore. Now I'm meeting the woman.
Yeah,
The brains behind the operation.
Exactly.
Okay, now I know where all that power comes
Are
from.
you kidding? I love that man, and I hear you do too.
I do.
So I am thrilled. All right, I know I'm going to see you in a minute.
Jimmy Dore say stuff that I can't say.
I know.
So yeah, he my.
What do I say that you can't say, and why can't you say it? I say the truth about politics that she can't say, or she would lose her space inside the establishment politic machine. That's what that means. And that's okay. Okay.
And I think you're probably seeing there why I like Nina Turner so much. I liked her more than Bernie Sanders. You know, this is a video from a while back when she was less within the corporate establishment, which you see how the State Department and the establishment co-ops people. It takes people who, you know, like Nina Turner, have their heart in the right place, and then enough time in that political establishment, and you just become a lib. But she's talking about how she loves Jimmy Dore, and you know how he says things that she can't say, in terms of calling out the establishment, with which Jimmy criticizes her for. But that's kind of the role that Nina played for Bernie Sanders. Like Bernie Sanders had certain stuff he couldn't say, otherwise it would become a giant media scandal, which, you know, I would say, who cares? Who cares? People don't like the corporate media anyways. Just let it be a scandal, Bernie, and tell it how it is. But that's kind of what Nina was doing, telling it how it is. And that's why I really liked her as a political figure. But now it appears she's pretty much just within the establishment.
The more power that they get, the less power they have.
The more power
How
they
is
get,
that
the less
possible?
power. Here we go.
I know.
So yeah, he my alter ego.
All right, I'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.
So I'm her alter ego. I say things she can't say. She loves me. And then she said this in June. She said, demanding better from Democrats makes you a good Democrat. Oh. Demanding better from Democrats makes you a good Democrat. And she said that June 26th, that's what it looks like to me. And I say that's a good point, Nina. Thank you. Not a lot of Democrats say that kind of stuff. So it's refreshing to hear that Nina Turner, she's all right.
Yeah, alter ego.
But then, if you look at this video, when we actually did that, when we actually demanded more from Democrats and we asked them to force a vote for Medicare for all in the middle of a deadly pandemic on the floor of the House when they had the leverage to do it, and they didn't, and they made bullshit excuses, and they haven't done anything. They haven't used, the squad has the ability to force votes, and they haven't done it once. They haven't done it for the minimum wage. They haven't done it for they haven't done it for Medicare for all. They haven't done it for marijuana. They haven't done it for anything. They're not using their power. And so we decided to pressure them to use their power, and they didn't. And they lied. And then she gaslit us and lied and protected politicians. You want to see it? Here she is protecting politicians and shitting on activists.
It's okay to be disappointed, but the squad is ultimately the best that we have in terms of being able to push an agenda. And what that means
and what that means is we're not going to get an agenda. That's what that.
That was the most insane force the vote argument, in my opinion. You know, the squad's the best we have. And if they use up all their political capital, how are we going to be able to push an agenda? And it's like, what do you mean? We can't push an agenda because then it might take away our power to push an agenda? And especially, you know, at a time when force the vote was happening, when they absolutely could have pushed for Medicare for all. I mean, that whole thing really kind of exposed the squad as frauds, because this was their whole argument. You know, we're doing our best. We're doing our best. Stop pressuring us to do more. You know, we'll push an agenda later on. We just can't do it right now for reasons. It's definitely not that we are listening to Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic establishment and we don't want to get out of favor with them, you know, and we're now part of that establishment. It's just because we're playing the long game. We're waiting to push for Medicare for all in 20 years after, I don't know, 40,000 people die every year in this country because they don't have access to health insurance. So we'll push this agenda later. And for the American people, it's like, what do you mean later? You know, there are people dying every single day because they don't have access to health care. I understand that corporate politicians don't know what that's like. But it sucks. And there's a reason there's such a high demand for Medicare for all, to the point where it's supported by well over 50% of Republicans now. But they wouldn't fight for it. And then they even turned around and said, you guys are actually racist and sexist for pressuring force the vote. It's just a bunch of men trying to tell strong women like AOC what to do. It's like they're politicians. We can't give our politicians a pass to be oligarchs and dictators because of if they have certain identity traits. But we'll try and skip to the recent part here where Nina called out Jimmy recently, rather than recapping her whole history, which is just going to make me sad.
Which is what she was doing. Then criticizing politicians who ran on Medicare for all, but oppose a floor vote. Here she is again. And then she had the balls to, after she said that, after all that gaslighting bullshit she said about force the vote. So here, by the way, so I tell her that. So I say the thing when they're in the wrong, not when they opponent. The progressives, they endorsed her corporate. It's like she's going deep undercover to support this thing from the inside. So now here's how she reacts to me. So she tweets out, she said, I say things she can't say. I'm her alter ego. So she makes this statement. She goes, the GOP sure doesn't want Congressman Turner. It's a fair retort to my tweet.
I can't find the part where she said Jimmy repackages talking points. Where is that? Over here. Or did they get in like a whole Twitter knockdown drag out? Either way, she's anti-Jimmy now after being pro-Jimmy. And it's because of force the vote and other things like that. But it's just another example of... Oh, here it is. Oh, that they got in this argument over the FBI, too. All right, I guess I didn't know the full story. I thought I had the video pulled up where she said out loud Jimmy Dore is repackaging right-wing talking points. I know she said that, but maybe I should look more at the full Twitter exchange they had. But basically, I think it was Jimmy trying to ally with Republicans who want to abolish the FBI, right? Which, when you say these things explicitly, like the liberal establishment is able to turn these things into like a controversy. Jimmy wants to work with Trump supporters. They're basically fascists. He's repackaging right-wing talking points. If you have these conversations, you can convince a bunch of liberal people to be anti-Jimmy, or convince a bunch of them that what Jimmy's doing is actually right-wing and is actually helping Trump. But I've been making TikTok videos for every day since the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago and saying, hey, Republicans, I know you're mad at the FBI. Come over to the left. Come join the movement or the struggle for socialism. We are against the FBI. We've been against the FBI from day one. Here's how the FBI killed Martin Luther King. And there hasn't been a scandal. There hasn't been a bunch of people calling me a red brown or calling me a right winger or a conservative because I've been appealing to Republicans. People just see that video and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Republicans are mad at the FBI. This guy's talking about all the terrible stuff the FBI has done, try and unite people against the FBI. But they turn these things into a scandal. Things that you wouldn't even think would be a scandal. And it makes everyone feel like they have to walk on eggshells, too. You can't say the wrong thing. You can't mess up. You can't use wrong speak. Otherwise, you're a right-winger like Jimmy Dore. And even if you support Medicare for all and ending the wars and canceling student debt and getting stronger workers' unions and raising the minimum wage, even if you support all that, you're still on the right because you said something that sounded like something Jimmy Dore would say, which sounded like something a right-winger would say. It's absurd. And the politicians use it, the establishment politicians use it because the same with Russiagate, which they used to attack Trump. That's their only way to attack actual left-wingers without engaging in actual arguments, without engaging on the substance and debating the policy and talking about why they won't force the vote, right? Why they won't actually fight for Medicare for all on the House floor. Oh, why? Because Jimmy Dore told us to do it, and he's a conservative. Okay, well, that's not a real argument. You've said nothing about the substance, but a bunch of people are going to be like, yeah, okay, Jimmy Dore is a conservative. And then we have more division. Eddie's hat is clearly right wing because it's red. Yes, this is actually a MAGA hat. I just have been wearing it backwards so nobody will realize that I'm right wing. My ambulance ride was $5,000. 5,000. First night in the hospital was 300,000. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is what I mean by people like. Not only did the force the vote thing sort of expose the squad as not really being willing to fight with the establishment on behalf of the workers. When it came right down to it, when it came time to fight, they sided with the establishment. But it also shows that they just don't understand. They're so out of touch with what life is like for working people and for people living in poverty and people who struggle to meet their basic needs or people who don't have health care. Like, these politicians are so out of touch to the point where they're like, we need to fight incrementally. We can't fight for Medicare for all now. We can't bring up this issue now. We can't turn this into a scandal now that people are dying in the streets during a global pandemic because they don't have access to health care. When we have the richest, most advanced technologically healthcare system in the world, we have to fight for those things later. Well, people are dying right now. People are dying right now. People are going bankrupt right now. 90 or over 60% of the country deals with medical debt at some point in their lives. Over 60% of the country. Our healthcare system is robbing people. And you are going to tell me from Washington, D.C., on top of a mountain of wealth from your corporate donors and whoever else, you're going to tell us that you can't fight for Medicare for all because it's too hard or we need to do it later. People can't afford later. Later, there's going to be thousands more people who are dead because you didn't do shit. Even though we hired you to fight the establishment, you sided with them rather than the people, which is what always happens, which is how our system is set up. So frustrating. Super Mario is MAGA, LOL, yes. We're also at a major housing crisis. Rents are skyrocketing. Yes. And the only, even if you talk to middle class people, petty bourgeois people, there's no point in investing anything other than real estate, right? People are just investing in real estate, trying to become one of the exploiters rather than one of the exploited. That's what a lot of working people are doing now, trying to save up so they can invest in another house and become a landlord for a second source of income, which will allow them to retire. But it's skyrocketing rents, and it's going to lead to a giant crash soon as well. And it just shows how parasitic capitalism has become in its current stage, in its neoliberal imperialist stage. It's no longer, just industrial capitalists and bankers ruling over their, giant manufacturing assembly lines where people are just making stuff all day and getting exploited. Right? It's this oligarchy of financial, parasitic, globalized capitalists. These bankers and these hedge funds like BlackRock and Vanguard Group, who own finance capital and make their money charging people on their rent or charging people interest on their debt or loans that they took out. They don't make their money actually producing things. They don't make their money through manufacturing. They make their money or by exploiting the actual labor of people. They make their money by money shuffling, and it exacerbates crises. It makes crises worse. It shows the absolute inefficiency and stupidity of capitalism, how it's led to this parasitic stage of total decay where, we have almost no real productive economy and everything's financial and paper shuffling. It's crazy. I don't know how anyone can look at global capitalism today and be like, yeah, we did it. This is the best system. We figured it out. We can't even have kids because we can't afford to have them or even get married. Literally, capitalism is the biggest cogblogger of all. It's true. And I'm getting to that age now. I'm 25. I've got a serious-ish girlfriend. And I'm like, I can't afford children. And I don't see myself being able to afford children in the near future. Unless I get some corporate job and sell out. So it's scary. And that's the situation people are in. They're like, oh, there are all these articles from like Cosmopolitan or whatever, or even NYT. They're like, oh, young people are having less kids. What are the factors behind this? Maybe they're just more independent. Maybe they're more focused on their career. No, they're human beings. They want to raise children and have families and have community. But we're totally isolated. We're totally exploited. And there's insane wealth inequality. All of our money is being spent on foreign wars and trying to push the whole world towards World War III. So now young people can't afford to have kids. That's literally it. There are other factors, I'm sure, that play an influence, but it's mostly just that we can't afford it. Oxygen subscription coming in soon. Literally. Did you already have the collapse talk? I did not. I want to go refill my water quick, and then we can talk about if the U.S. empire is destined to collapse like Rome, which is something that we talked about like a year ago on this channel, but I want to discuss again. Hi from Lomas Turbas. Hello. Any literature resources associated with children? That's a good idea. I don't know. I'm sure there were like Soviet children's books about Marxism, but it's an interesting question. Check out our library at Midwestern Marx. We have a whole library of books, but on the website. It's hard living in capitalism. It is. Have the baby, Eddie. Just do it. All right, I will. If I go bankrupt, I declare bankruptcy, and then I'm good, right? Pedagogy was very advanced in the Soviet Union. That is facts. Shout out to Lev Vygotsky, who's had all the revolutionary elements of his work ripped out when it's taught in the West. All right, I'm going to refill my water, and then we will talk about... Where is it? Where'd it go? Here it is. And then we'll talk about Michael Parenti, the assassination of Julius Caesar in the U.S. and Rome. There, I'll put it right there. So you all know what you have to look forward to. I forgot my cup to fill it with water. Water acquired. Before we go to this, though, since we're all here, since we're all friends, before we talk about this, what are some recommendations people have for improving the stream? Improving production quality, improving the content itself, improving how much we interact with the chat. By example, one idea I've had for a while that I want to implement is doing a segment every day or so, maybe not every day, but some of the shows where I let people call in, where I set up my StreamYard so that it can record Discord calls, and then just have y'all call in and chat with you. I think that could really improve the stream and allow us to do a new segment that we've never done before. And allow for more viewer engagement and viewer interaction. So, Eric the Bread, more Stalin content. All right. Emperor's Armpits. Call-ins are a gamble. That's for sure. You know, maybe it might be better to pre-record that section, right? I mean, I could do it live and then just only upload to YouTube the best ones. But that's true. You can get some totally random people. Eddie, I'd love to have you on my channel to talk. We can also talk about channel stuff. Oh man, I would love that. Do you want to set that up on Twitter? I know that we are mutuals on Twitter. If you just shoot a DM to the Midwestern Marks account, then I will be sure to respond to it. Let me. If I don't put stuff in my calendar, it gets forgotten. That's how I figured out my brain operates. Even if it's like a Twitter DM, I'll tell someone to DM me on Twitter and then realize like a month later I never read it and I feel terrible. But sorry if I've ever done that to you. Anybody in the chat. Boom. That's how you take control of your life, folks. That's how the whole revolution's planned in that bitch. Might be good for community, true. I'll be working at Walmart at 65 yelling Cobra at folks. Handing out copies of Lenin to the kids. Read this. Create revolution before you're old like me. But that's only for those who have been officially employed on contract. Some collabs with other streamers would be cool. That's a great idea. I've been trying to check my email more, and then, you know, when people reach out trying to go on their shows. So I recently did Coming from Left Field, which is a great podcast. But, you know, there are people who have invited me on their shows who have like thousands of subs. And I've just kind of forgot to respond. But I'm doing a debate with Benjamin Politics soon. And like, obviously I don't want to debate a libertarian. Like I'd rather do almost anything else with my time, but I mean, it'll be funny. But the dude's got like 200,000 followers. So there's some things I just got to take it on the chin. Be like, do this to popularize the channel. Lenin content. Are you guys in favor of Stalin or Trotsky? Definitely Stalinist over her. I mean, there are Trotskyists in the chat, but anytime it comes up, we get into a debate about it. Yeah, we can set it up on Twitter. Perfect, Jay. Sounds good. JB and Eddie would be a great duo. Well, nice. We're going to make it happen. Maybe a visual indicator of when you're focusing on responding to a video and not reading chat so people know when and when not to chat. Possibly an icon that shows up on screen. Okay, that makes sense. Because sometimes I will be talking about a video, but I'll, you know, have this. I won't have the screen that I'm watching. So that probably can get confusing. Live surveys. That'd be cool. That'd be really cool. Like public access TV. That's basically what Twitch is. Public access TV, but through the computer. Do an episode for Marxist method of self-improvement. Take over the Peterson market share. I don't know if you mean this as a joke, Emperor's Armpits, but I love this idea. And I've had this idea in the back of my head with all my content, TikTok content, like trying to I know a lot of kids watch me, so I want to be a positive influence not only in their politics but how they live their lives if I can. And that's the reason behind like workout videos or like encouraging kids to read and stuff. Like, yes, people ask for them, but also like show people that Marxist values can be applied to developing yourself and improving yourself. And, there's such a, like Jordan Peterson shows that there's such a desire for that. Like he's basically a self-help guru, in addition to a pseudo intellectual. And that's why people like Andrew Tate have gotten so popular, like they talk about their time in combat sports and how to live your life and not be weak. And, I'm not drawn to Andrew Tate because I feel like I figured out my own values, but yes, I've also figured them out through like combat sports and stuff. So maybe we could take over their market share. Improving oneself with your community is like one of the base needs of people for sure. We don't need more self-help nonsense. But if we did it Marxist, we could do it better. Right? We're doing self-help for organizing and, self-control and developing yourself and developing your community is a central part of organizing, and organizing is impossible without it. And the main problem and the main reason for the overwhelming amount of self-help books is that they teach you how to climb capitalism. Right? They teach you self-help within capitalism, how to be happy while working this many hours a day and chasing your dream, which you're going to commodify and, turn into something that makes money and chase that. It's basically the self-help ideology. And then just, be positive, give yourself positive self-talk. Don't be depressed about it. But we're not doing self-help from an individualist perspective. We're doing it from a collectivist perspective and not from a capitalistic perspective, but a Marxist one. So we're sublating self-help. And the other reason self-help books are popular is because they're really easy to write. I could write a self-help book right now and, I know some people would buy it. There's a big demand in the market for that and they're easy to produce. But Eddie, can you put dates on the stream so I won't be late? I can try, but I pretty much just do them whenever I have time. I can try to do that though in the future. Eddie and Andrew Tate fight. Okay, let's do it. I will definitely take on Andrew Tate. Just kidding. Andrew Tate would beat me up in kickboxing. I'd definitely beat him in wrestling though. We can combat nihilism without selling snake oil and misogyny. Who said that? I feel like you're seeing this though through like a capitalistic market lens, like the self-help genre. Like Jordan Peterson telling boys to like clean their room and try and do stuff is ultimately good, right? He's telling them to like get their life in order, but where he fails is when he tells them not to critique society, and he also fails to understand how society affects the individual. How society can create depression. So that leads to an analysis in his, self-help of how to lead your life. And it leads to him, selling snake oil or selling misogyny. But like, if you sublated the self-help genre and did it from a Marxist perspective, you get rid of all that. So it's no longer work out so that you can look good and, make yourself attractive to others and also interviewers and climb the career ladder and use your wealth to get women and money, which makes you happy, according to a lot of self-help stuff. Instead of that, it would be like, I don't know, spend more time gardening or spend more time in your community. Spend, exercise, take magnesium, whatever these healthy habits are that combat depression. But then combine it with like organizing, right? Throw yourself into the class struggle, get to know your coworkers, build community with them, build community with your local community. Because organizing does all these things, and all these things happen to combat depression. So you put it in a Marxist perspective, I feel like I feel like you can make self-help not cringe. I got totally sidetracked, y'all. I'm sorry. We're supposed to talk about Parenti. Peterson is a Thatcherite pretending there is no society. Yes. He's a dum-dum. All right, so I've been reading Michael Parenti's The Assassination of Julius Caesar. A while back, we criticized a video at Midwestern Marks, or I just criticized it. It was like a Vice video about the fall of Rome. And they were talking about how Trump might represent the fall of Rome, or the Capitol riot specifically. So their argument for that was that Trump is just so crazy that he represents the emperors at the end of Rome's time, right? Like when Rome just had dictators in the era after Caesar, leading up to the collapse, sort of autocratic leaders who they were comparing Trump to. And they were comparing the riots and the economic turmoil that was going on in Rome at the time to the Capitol riots themselves. So let's just watch the first part of this so you can kind of see what I'm talking about.
I do think that there is a lot breaking down. I absolutely do not think January 6th is the high water mark. Of course not. Do I think something like this will happen again at some point in the next 10 years? Yeah, absolutely I do.
So what I mostly criticized them for in this video was using the great man of history fallacy, right? They pretty much look at Russia during the time of the Russian October Revolution, which was a bunch of consecutive revolutions that ultimately led to the establishment of the USSR, the world's first socialist workers' state. But they compare Tsar Nicholas, who was in power of Russia at the time, to Trump, and then they compare him to the Caesars in Rome. Who was the Caesar in power when Rome actually fell? I'm looking that up. Romulus Augustulus. So they just compare. Fell, you mean divided? Sure. Because it was divided into like the different sections of the people or the different nations who made up Rome. Yes, I guess I mean divided. East Rome trucks on for 1,000 more years. Okay, this is obviously not my specialty in history, but thank you for letting me know, chat. But either way, what these guys do is they compare the great men of history, this sort of liberal way of looking at history, where we say everything that went on in this country is because of their leader. World War II is just this great battle between FDR, Stalin, and Hitler and Winston Churchill. And Rome, you can just boil pretty much everything down to who was the leader at that time, who was the Caesar. Same with Russia. They don't look at the class forces which led to the Russian Revolution, which are analyzed in depth by people like Lenin and Stalin. They just look at whoever led the revolution and who was the leader put in power and who was the leader that's overthrown. So you end up getting, not a very good view or not a very good understanding of why things happen. So what Parenti does in this book, where he talks about Julius Caesar's rise to power and the reactionary dictators who were called Caesar, which would fall to Caesar and eventually lead to the dividing and the later fall of Rome. Parenti talks about the class forces that brought Caesar to power. And Caesar was a populare or populari, I don't know how you pronounce it. But basically, it's just a populist. So the economic conditions for the slaves and the proletarians in Rome had been getting worse for years and years and years and years, at the behest and the enrichment of this oligarchy, this aristocracy, which came to be more and more and more in control of the Senate, really completely gaining control of the Senate after the assassination of Caesar. After the most popular man of the people, the most popular populist politician, had been taken out by his competitors and his rivals. So Caesar is still an expansionist. He still believed in imperialism, right? But he was almost like a social democrat. He was almost like, we're going to do land redistribution. We're going to give stuff to the working masses of Rome so they don't revolt. And the argument Parenti makes, and obviously I've demonstrated in here that later Roman history is not my specialty, but the argument that Parenti makes is, after Caesar's taken out, you have these reactionary, autocratic Caesars take power, which ultimately leads to the eventual collapse or division of Rome, because nothing is done for the working people. So they just continue to riot. They continue to rise up. And, they eventually band together, organize together, and through class struggle, bring about the fall of the empire. And then, society changes very much from beyond then. So comparing this to the US, I mean, Carlos and I always say that, like, Bernie Sanders is the person who could have fixed capitalism, right? Or the person who could have saved capitalism. Because even in the richest country in the world, in the heart of the empire, we have, more debt in circulation than actual money. There's 40,000 people who die every year because they don't have access to health insurance. There's massive, massive wealth inequality. Most of the farmland is owned by Bill Gates. We have this parasitism and decay of capitalism going on even in what's supposed to be the wealthiest country in the world, where you can chase the American dream and really climb the social and economic ladder. It's no longer like that, but the wars are still ongoing, right? The capitalist imperialism and capitalist expansionism is still ongoing. And we had this person like Bernie Sanders, who was like, oh, hey, can we please give people health care? Hey, can we please raise the minimum wage above starvation? Can we please make sure, the police aren't murdering black people in the streets? And then the establishment said, hell no, what are you talking about, Bernie? Get out of here. You are ridiculous. We're going to collaborate and use the DNC and use these different apparatuses of the oligarchy to make sure that Bernie doesn't come to power. And make sure that he doesn't enact these minor social reforms, which would have made life better for people living within the empire. And then you have Trump come to power. You have this kind of crazy, bumbling idiot, reactionary pseudo-populist, who the Democrats then turn to Russiagate and start calling him a puppet of Russia in response to this. Joe Biden takes the election in 2020, again with the Democrats collaborating against Bernie, the social democrat who wants to make life better for the popular masses in the empire. And now you're seeing the entire Democratic establishment, as well as the Silicon Valley oligarchs who control social media, crack down on freedom of speech. Homeland Security tried to create a disinformation board, so they could prevent the conversations and the information that the masses are seeing and that they're sharing and spreading and talking about amongst one another. So, it is sort of a move towards a more dictatorial state apparatus as the economic conditions and the class conditions are getting worse. Do I think America's about to collapse like Rome? I don't know. That's where my analysis ends, because like I said, I don't really know. This book cuts off sort of after Caesar, when the first dictatorial, autocratic, reactionary leader takes power. And then it says, eventually Rome would collapse. But, I do think that socialism's the only way to save like the American masses at this point. That's the only way to save them from a situation where there's like civil war, much worse riots than what we've seen so far, fighting on a larger scale, continued polarization, because the economic conditions and the cost of living and stuff like that is only going to get worse, as is the social isolation and pharmaceutical industry pushing a bunch of opioids on us and drugs on us in response to the alienation of capitalism. That stuff's only going to increase, plus the climate crisis on top of it. And what are the people running our country focused on? What are they focused on? Sending millions and billions of dollars and weapons to Ukraine. They're focused on a new Cold War with Russia and China. So if the masses were to really get organized and get serious and capture state power from the finance capitalists and the military industrial complex corporations and the companies who have controlled it, and then capture the means of production from those oligarchs who control them so on such a high scale, large level, or control them so thoroughly, we could save people here, right? We can construct something before that takes care of the masses, takes care of the working people, takes care of those whose labor makes society really run, rather than allowing our country to continue to decay into parasitism and decrease living standards for the masses and endless war and ignoring the climate crisis. We can keep going that direction. Yeah, I think it's going to lead to something like collapse of Rome. And it's going to, the either way, the Democratic establishment and the GOP establishment, the liberal and conservative political ruling classes, will become more autocratic, right? They will crack down and become more reactionary and more willing to use violence against people the same way you saw in Rome. That's going to happen regardless, but it's a matter of, does a socialist organization take power and organize workers and really lead to something constructive? Or do we allow this imperialist oligarchy who currently controls the State Department to just let us go? The choice is up to us, and only through our hard work can we save us. I agree. As a socialist, the capitalists will only lead us to our demise. Their desire for profit is stronger than their desire to see this planet thrive. I think that's been proven by history. What Jay is saying here, I think it's being proven even more now, right? Like, we have the climate crisis looming, which the Democrats, the Joe Bidens of the world, and Kamala Harris's acknowledge. Like, yeah, climate change is real. We got to do something about it. Here, let's send $50 billion of weapons to Ukraine and fight a proxy war against Russia. It's like, how's this doing anything about climate change? It's not. They don't care about these things. They're literally pushing us closer to an ecological catastrophe. And this is why Malthusianism, which will actually lead into our next segment, this is why Malthusianism is becoming part of the ruling class ideology. Sort of depopulationism, liberal environmentalism, like everybody just needs to consume less and, use cardboard utensils, rather than eco-socialism, right? Rather than looking at the metabolic rifts that are created in Earth's natural recycling processes through human production. Which that's what climate change really is, on a scientific level. Not that I claim to be a scientist. But if you have planned production, and not this anarchic market system where a handful of oligarchs plan production based on what makes them the most profit, you can produce things in a way that are in harmony with the Earth's natural processes. That's eco-socialism. That's the antithesis of Malthusianism, which is this liberal ideology of depopulationism. We'll just produce way less. The masses are just too greedy and they're consuming too much. This sort of ideology has been used for a while to like not let the productive forces develop in Africa or Latin America. Like the US consumes more than like 6 times more than the average country in the world. And then when Africa wants to industrialize, right, when they want to create machines that are going to vastly increase standard of living and productive capacity, the US is like, "Oh, think about how much you're polluting," as we pollute 6 times more than them in reality and do nothing to reverse it. But it's good to be aware of this Malthusian ideology because Marx has been combating Marx combated Robert Thomas Malthus way back in the day, like very thoroughly. There's a huge section of Capital Volume 1 that is devoted to combating Malthusianism, because Malthus was literally arguing, when there's less people, when there's less working class people, when the masses are a smaller population, wealth is higher, and then eventually they run out of food and society runs out of commodities to feed those people and depopulation happens. And Malthus used like the Irish potato famine as an example of how depopulation happens when there's not enough to feed everyone. And that's just how economics works. And Malthus did not use much evidence to prove his theories. Of course not, because his theories are nonsense. So Marx spends a lot of time debunking them and showing no, the famines that Malthus attributes to population getting too big are attributable to capitalism. These were economic crises created where people didn't have enough money, enough of the universal equivalent to buy food because their wages were too low, and they were forced off of the farmland by speculating corporations. We talked about how in China's version of socialism, people have been given their own land plot by the government, which is protected from corporate speculation and allows them to grow food, especially in rural areas. And this is to combat the sort of speculation and enclosure of the commons, as Marx calls it in Capital, that happens when capitalism is expanding and when capitalism is conquering all the land. Peasants are forced off their land and into the towns where they search for industrial jobs. And if they don't find them, they die of famine. So Marx is saying this isn't, these aren't famines of population, Malthus. These are famines of production, or famines of capitalist contradictions, even not even production. Because capitalism produces enough to feed everyone. There was enough to feed everyone a lot of these famines, but people didn't have enough money to buy the food. So it was really just a contradiction, a crisis of capitalism. So I thought it was just Marx who combated Malthus, but actually George Hegel, who Marx bases a lot of his work off of, was alive at the time of Malthus. I had to look it up after I read this. But he combated this Malthusian ideology too. And there's a John Paul Sartre quote that says, like, every argument you find from the bourgeois is just like a reformulation of some argument that existed before Marx that Marx already destroyed. And that's a little bit dogmatic, like seeing Marx as a god rather than just a thinker who developed a really good method or lens for analyzing social society. But it is funny because it does seem true sometimes. Like liberals are digging up and repurposing this Malthusian depopulation ideology as the reason to combat climate change. Oh, bye, Jay. See you later. I will check my DM. Thank you very much. Thank you for hanging out with us for so long. Appreciate it. But anyways, it's a good quote, that Sartre quote, because there are so many arguments that have already been thoroughly refuted that are just repurposed and modernized. And that's exactly what this depopulationism is. Let us keep hoarding our capital and hoarding our wealth and exploiting the vast majority of society. And taxing the crap out of you, hiring thousands of more IRS agents to audit the working class, so we can pay for our endless wars of expansion. And then when climate change becomes a problem, we'll just let the masses be depopulated, and that'll fix everything. It's the same ideology it's always been. Let us hoard our wealth. Let us not take care of the environment. And let us just not care about the masses. And Thomas Malthus tried to put justification and argument to that, which was insanely ridiculous, which is why Marx and Hegel refuted it so thoroughly. But the liberals are just repurposing it today. So it's good to know its ideological roots. But on page 38, George Hegel says something super anti-Malthus that I wanted to read. Which part did I want to read? End of the first paragraph. So he says, when the admiration of God that is revealed in natural things such as trees and animals is opposed to what is human, far removed from a religion of ancient Egyptians. So he's criticizing the ancient Egyptian religions and religion in general, for seeing the divine, or what connects all of life, or what is holy or universal in nature. And he's saying Christianity thinks it's evolved, the highest evolved form of religion or whatever, but it's similar to the Egyptian religion, which was drawn from cats and dogs. And then he criticizes Hinduism because it gives reverence to cows. He says the cows and apes in the Hindu religion are held in reverence and are scrupulously concerned for the maintenance and nourishment of these animals. The people are in India. While they allow men to suffer and hunger. Who would put animals above the hunger of men? It seems to be expressed by such a view that humans' actions as regards nature is ungodly. Humans' actions as regards nature, so production. That the operations of nature are divine operations, but what man produces from nature is ungodly. But the productions of human reason might at least be esteemed as much as nature. In doing so, however, we cede less to human reason than is permitted to us. If the life and the action of animals be divine, human action must stand much higher and must be worthy to be called divine in an infinitely high sense. The preeminence of human thought must forthwith be avowed. So, despite the maybe old school European colonial racism that George Hegel's holding on to there, not criticizing colonialism and causing famines in India, but exclusively blaming Hinduism, still, he's criticizing religion, which sees the divine and places nature and animals above human reason and human thought, even going so far as to say basically they put it above human labor, which, Marx takes Hegel much further, and labor is a very big deal for Marx, but there's a lot of times in Hegel's writing where he's basically being a materialist and basically, going right up to a Marxist idea without saying what Marx would have said, or coming to the exact same conclusions. And that's one of them, where he says that people see, human labor's productions, people like Malthus see the productions of human labor and human reason, using reason to interact with nature, which is production, which is the base of society for Marx. People see that as below animals, because nature's processes are divine. And as I said, we do know that nature's processes are naturally recycling, right? So that human production does interrupt nature's natural processes. But we know this because of human reason, right? And we need to understand that human reason should be placed over animals and over nature, and that we should maximize production and do production in a way that's sustainable with the ecology. Mostly so that the ecology doesn't kill humans, though. Humans are always prioritized. humanity is always number one. And reason is the number one way that we can find our way out of problems and continue to advance as a species. And we need to have what Marx really comes along and says then is we need to have more reason in production. And Marx was one of the first ecologists. He wrote a lot about the soil and overuse of the soil in agriculture and how that can decrease food production, stuff like that. But he says we need more reason in production. The Enlightenment gave us reason in government. We have democracies, at least they claim to be democracies. But Marx is saying, but we have no reason in production. We have no reason to how we organize the classes. We just have one oligarchic class who rules over the other, and they produce anarchically based on the whims of the market and in a way that maximizes profit rather than well-being. So if we inject reason into production, if the masses gain a hold of production and carry it out in a more reasonable manner, like I said, we can do it in a way that supports all of humanity, supports the working masses, but also supports the ecology, supports the environment and sustains it in a way that allows for the continued sustenance and continued development and growth of humanity. Check out, if people want a book on that, by an actual scientist, not by my dumbass, because science is literally like my worst subject. Literally the worst. Check out this Marxist ecologist, Ian Angus, and specifically his book, Facing the Anthropocene. So he talks about in this book, it's one of my favorite books, he talks about how the modern ecologists, modern Marxist ecologists, they've been reading like John Bellamy Foster, who's a Marxist ecologist, and they've been keeping up with modern ecological literature and some of the things China's doing and whatnot. But actually, the sort of secret to understanding eco-socialism and climate change and whatnot has been in Marx the whole time. In chapter 3 of Capital Volume 1, he talks about the natural processes of nature, and where nature, if humans stay away from it and don't touch it, it will continue recycling itself and growing on its own. It has these natural recycling processes that allow nature to, continue to live and grow and develop, and different forms of life interact with other forms of life. But what happens when capitalist production, which is, like I said, based on making a profit and based on the market, and has no concern for the ecology, or even really the working masses who create the wealth of capitalism, a metabolic rift is created in these natural recycling processes. So basically, certain chemicals in the earth aren't able to recycle themselves in the way that they're used to, and you end up with things like too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And like I said, using human reason and using science and understanding production better and decreasing the gap between mental and physical labor, as Marx would say, we can produce in a way that is in harmony with these natural processes. We can continue to understand these processes better and better and better, and adapt how we produce to them. If we have socialism, if we have ego-socialism, but we don't. We have anarchic, market-driven capitalism, profit-driven capitalism, which could care less about the ecology's natural processes. So you can see in the way Ian Angus sets this up, our only way to save ourselves is ego-socialism. Otherwise we'll allow the capitalists to literally destroy the freaking planet. And then when you understand Malthus, and that, the liberals today are pushing depopulationism and Malthusianism, the ruling classes, people like Bill Gates are. And this is something Marx has been combating from the bourgeois ideologues, the ruling class ideologues since way back when. And it's been something Hegel's been combating since even before that. I don't know. I guess you kind of see how sick and evil it is that there's this imperialist ruling class trying to hang on to their power. And they see that if they keep going this way, it's going to lead to ecological crises as well as economic crises, which could lead, tons of people to die. And then they embrace depopulationism as their ideology, then Malthusianism. Oh, there's just too many people. It just got too many people on Earth. We can't produce enough for all of them. Some of them got to go. It's terrible. And, that's why I always profess eco-socialism, though, because, like, what are you going to do about the climate crisis if you just, like, don't believe in climate change? Or, if you're just an anti-Malthusian, right? If you're only against Malthus and depopulationism, which good. But then what's the alternative, right? What's the alternative for construction that doesn't destroy the planet? And I don't know if a lot of people know what that is, so they just kind of ignore climate change. But that's not good. Watch Dr. Paul Cockshot's videos using Marxist ecology to explain how climate change is real. And then read this Ian Angus book about facing the Anthropocene, because we need to have a debunk to this depopulation as BS. Because socialism in the past, like, the Soviet Union industrialized the country, but that did cause more pollution, and destroy a lot of nature, which as socialists, bringing people out of poverty and developing human civilization is good, and that comes first. But we can also take care of the earth and take care of its natural processes and make sure the things that we need from the earth to sustain ourselves don't get used up and destroyed. Just went to a neo-Nazi rally today to see what they were doing and take notes of what they were trying to do. They didn't even put economic input, just bash Jews and communism. Yeah, I mean, they can't, right? It's sort of like the mirror of wokeism. But neo-Nazis are more nefarious and violent, obviously. But it's almost like the same thing where it's like they are basically mad at capitalism. They're basically mad at the social isolationism and depression and alienation that they feel under capitalism. But then their solutions are just, we need to band together and be violent and love our country and hate this one group based on their identity. It's like, what? How did you come to that? But they come to that by never, ever, ever criticizing the system. No, capitalism's good. I just hate everything else about capitalist society. And it's that identity group's fault. It is interesting to see how that happens, how their brains get warped into that. Planting trees is communism, the protest said as I walked into the library. I feel like this is the response. People say capitalism plays into humans' natural greed, therefore a natural system for humans. Meanwhile, we're disrupting all the natural cycles for the sake of capitalism itself. Right. That is a good example. I would just always draw it back to like what Hegel was saying. Capitalism isn't just bad in that it disrupts Earth's natural cycles, and that makes it therefore unnatural, right? Because that's idealism. The reason that climate change is bad and disrupting Earth's natural cycles is bad is because it's going to limit humans' ability to produce, and it's going to cause humans to die, or it's going to create, natural disasters which cause humans to die. So we want to maintain the Earth. Yes, but not just for the sake of maintaining the Earth. We want to maintain the Earth for the sake of humanity, because socialism is ultimately humanity first, and creating a system that is actually, natural and based on humanity's betterment. So everything you said is true. Everything you said is true. People say capitalism plays into humans' natural greed, therefore it's a natural system. Meanwhile, we're disrupting the natural cycles of with capitalism. Yes, absolutely, everything is true, and that shows capitalism is not a natural system for humans because it's going to cause humans to kill themselves, to destroy the source of their resources and the source of human production, and cause humans to die. But, it's not only bad because we're destroying nature, because then, people can respond with that depopulationism. Oh, we'll just get rid of the people. There's too many people. People even say, like, we were talking about this earlier on stream. They'll say, well, your generation's having less kids anyways, so the population will go down and we'll all be fine. And it's like people are having less kids because they can't afford them, because the economic situation is so bad, because capitalism, which is destroying the earth, won't let people have kids. So that's another way people steer into depopulationism. And you always got to center humanity and human reason. Their solution was always kill non-white children. Yes. So that's the other element. As I was talking about with Bill Gates in Africa, they'll say, we can't industrialize Africa because of pollution. Meanwhile, in the U.S., we produce 6 times more than them. And Bill Gates has been trying to spread birth control and other population preventative methods in Africa. Yeah, and they've done it in the streets of the U.S. too. Marx and Engels' price, human nature is to improve your life. Always has been. The improvements of material conditions, real human nature is Marxism. Yes, that's ultimately what I was getting at with the last rant about how, nature is for humanity, or we want to control nature for humanity because reason is number one. And you having human reason control production, having it capture the means of production and production, as well as the government, as well as the state, which is supposed to function rationally now, is making production and making society itself more human, in line with human nature, what humans want. Exactly. Marxism is real human nature is Marxism. Because, with the Enlightenment, we said human reason is number one, right? Human reason is how we have everything and have civilization and how we improve ourselves. So we need a government, a state, a politics based on reason. So we're going to have democracy. And Marx says, no, the ruling class of any society is the ruling economic class. There's no democracy unless you democratize production. So as he said, all these basically capitalist democracies have now become oligarchies, autocratic oligarchies that are completely against human nature, that alienate humans from each other, alienate humans from the product of their own labor, alienates humans from nature itself, interrupts nature's natural processes, and leads humans to die. And capturing production, getting the working masses in control of production and planning it rationally, is moving in favor of human nature and what will allow humans to flourish. Do I have anything more I want to talk about? Because I really got to go to the bathroom. I don't think so. All right, y'all. I'm going to cut off the stream here. It's been awesome. 2.5 hour stream. Pretty long one. Hope y'all like the midday streams. I really got to pee. But yeah. Thanks for hanging out for such a long time. Read Hegel. Read Marx. Join the Midwestern Marx Discord. And send me videos that you want to see me react to. Support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. I'm going to send y'all a copy. I'm going to put the link tree in the chat before I leave and go pee. Linktree.com/MidwesternMarx. Thank you, everyone who was here the whole time. Thank you, Ware Pilgrim. Thank you, Cobra Commander. Thank you, Unparalleled Dev. Thank you, Steve Richter. Thank you all. Thank you, Odeka. Please join the Midwestern Marks Discord so we can interact further. And yeah, all right. And build socialism. Much love, everyone. Peace.